and we are good to go. So just to get right into the thick of it, guys, so normally a lot of us probably worked in Photoshop, and it's probably good to note that, well, I don't have a drawing that has several layers right now. Maybe my previous one, nah, that probably doesn't have anything on it. Cancel. Or press OK. Or you know what, we'll get out of Photoshop. I mean, I'm not trying to spend too much time on Photoshop, but essentially you can also turn off all the other layers and save out these images at a time, right? So you don't necessarily export each layer all at once, but for instance, if I had point, line, and plane, I could make those 3 separate images. Does that make sense, guys? Yeah. Okay. Because I won't necessarily do it today because I don't think I have one that has a bunch of layers on it. Sorry, I was seeing if this maybe had any layers, but essentially you would turn on and off certain layers. I don't know why I'm freezing up today. Come on, Photoshop, get with it. But essentially you can turn on and off and then file save, right? So that you can actually separate some of those layers. And to be fair, there are ways to export all those thousands of layers, but all you'd have to do is look up in Google how to export multiple layers at a time in Photoshop. I did mention last time that there's also a 90-day trial for Rhino 8. And yes, you don't have to use your edu account there. You can use just about all the email accounts you have, and you can essentially have Rhino for free for a very long time. But in our case, in sophomore year, when you hit Design 3, or if you're in computer graphics, you'll get your own copy for a personal computer. And some of us in computer graphics probably already have their copies. But again, there should be no excuse. Not only can you work in here, at least on the planned days, you can also work at home, right? So, does everybody have Rhino installed? Who has Rhino installed at home? Very good. Get that 90-day trial, right? And if you need help with that, it's a pretty easy installation, just like just about any other program. Make sure you unclick the boxes that say send me a bunch of crap on my email, right? Because they always throw those into those free trial things. But first things first, I'm going to try and treat this like this is the first time in Rhino, but I don't want to overlap too many things. And to be fair, we're going to dive right into it. Normally in my computer graphics, as they know, I kind of break things up bit by bit, but we're almost going like directly into assignment 3. You know, it's like exercise 1, 2, and 3 all in one. So if you've taken my computer graphics, I'll do a little bit that's new, probably, and obviously used in a very different way. But again, it's all about the methodology. So don't get me wrong, if we all were instructed to cut these out piece by piece, fold them together, and make a model out of it, we could, right? But remember that Rhino is really just trying to mimic reality, right? It's just free space. And I forget the word that Bohuslav used, but it was a really good word. I'm going to start using it. Ethereal, or he said like, started with a V. Anyway. But first things first, what you want to do in Rhino is type in units. Because of course we want to be in the right units. We want to scale our drawings correct. And we want to make every model in real world space 1-to-1. So if this thing is exactly 4 inches by 27 inches, you want to make that exactly that case here. So in units, I'm going to stick with inches, but keep in mind by default usually it's in millimeters because most programs, robots, CNC machines, they work in millimeters, and the rest of the world does, by the way. But in our case, I like to switch it to feet and inches. I'm not a huge fan of decimals, even though decimals are cool. But again, units is definitely the first thing you want to accomplish. The next thing, just to kind of break things down, this is what the Macintosh looks like. To be fair, yes.
What was the scale you did?
Inches. Yeah, just because our... What is that?
Was it 1/8?
You mean that little bottom piece?
Yeah, sorry.
No, that's just like the display precision.
Okay.
Like, I mean, you can get it precise and unprecise, but good question. Just to kind of break down some of the vocabulary, again, kind of review for some of us, these are called your viewports. You'll notice when you click on them, these top left piece kind of turns blue or turns highlighted in some way. That means it's basically activated, right? If you double click on a viewport, it turns into that viewport, which is really nice. If you double click on it again, it goes back to the 4 pieces. That's super important because we're about to kind of work in a 3-dimensional way, and let's face it, we don't have VR headsets on. We can't literally work in 3-dimensional space yet. But in our case, this is the way we combat it with a 2-dimensional screen. Obviously, we have our perspective view, our right view, and our front view. If I were to essentially draw a box, you might notice that it's actually in wireframe at first by default. If you down click on that little down arrow, just a regular click, we'll switch that to our shaded view. And just to explain this just a little bit, obviously it goes without saying, now it's a shaded perspective drawing. Now the way that I'm moving around is actually holding my right click, right? If I hold shift and right click, I can pan. So again, some of this is like playing an instrument. You got to learn, you know, you can't just like put all your hands on the piano. You got to play each by a certain key, right? However, you can also change this view to rendered, right, and get something a little bit more satisfying. You can get a ghosted view, where we can see through the object. And not to explain everything, but there's a lot here. Don't pick artistic or ray traced. It'll really slow down your computer. You could probably do it at the school, but again, this is a really great way to freeze your computer if you're on a laptop. So don't choose ray traced. Another thing that we can do is we can set these views. So if you want them in a different spot, you definitely can, but please don't do it to the school computers. That's definitely something a little bit more personal. And if you do change it, for the love of God, please change it back, right? If you're computer savvy, that's fine, and you're more than welcome and have the freedom to do so, but I swear, please change it back, right? Because the next student may not have that knowledge. In our case though, we've made a box, and really the first thing we need to for this project is set the units and get a little bit more familiar with the tools, so I'm going to do that a little bit hands-on. You'll notice one of my favorite tools is called Snap, but nobody seems to laugh at that anymore. Maybe it was a 90s thing. But it's called Snap, and essentially it's probably the most awesome tool, and the reason why we can be so accurate in a digital realm is obviously we can select endpoints, we can select points, midpoints, center points, perpendicular, tangents, quadrants. Anyway, I usually leave these on, so that's in, point, mid, center, intersection, and perpendicular. Probably the most often used, so I typically just leave those on. If you're on a Windows program, you'll find it actually at the bottom here, right? You'll see that there is an Snap button. That's really great because it turns that on and off. And there's a couple of different toggles, and I'm not going to get so much into the shortcuts on the keyboard, but I may call them out. The next thing that we want to do is get our image, and intuitively enough, you'll notice that there is a command bar at the top left on Mac, and the command bar is actually at the top on Windows. Keep in mind this command bar is your best friend, and it's literally the reason why this program is probably better than many, because I can literally just type in picture, enter, and voila, I can get a picture going. In my case, I'm going to ask Kayla where that file is or what it's called. Is it a PDF? So inherently PDFs don't open up on Rhino, but that's okay. Just keep in mind, that's fine. I honestly like when there's a little bit of a mistake because I can show you how to fix it, right? Out of all the files that you think Rhino can open, PDF is definitely not one of them, unfortunately. So in my case, I'd want to go to Illustrator, open that bad boy up, or at least for the sake of tutorial, I'm just going to take a screenshot because I know that's going to automatically turn it into a PNG. So in my case, I'll open up Kayla's. Fantastic. I think I'm going to work in the black and white today, but I think since everybody actually has color, it might be beneficial to use color, so thank you for having both. In my case, I'm going to do Command Shift and the number 4 on a Mac, probably the best tool ever, and basically grab a snapshot of that. Now for you, what you would want to do is export that as a JPEG or a PNG from Photoshop. Now that could be layer by layer, or it could be all one composite image, and you can start to dissect it again in Rhino. However, if you have something very complex where things start to overlap and start to do those kinds of things, maybe you have 1,000 items, you might want to actually separate your pieces and upload these images one at a time. Now, for the sake of tutorial, I kind of want to show you how to do that. So I'm going to also get Kayla's black and white screenshot as well. That, and we can see how well they line up. No, I'm just kidding.
How do you take a screenshot on these computers?
On those computers, you'll hit the function key, which is like the little blue button, and you'll see a button kind of towards over here that says print screen. It'll also be in blue.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Good question. In our case, I want to take those 2 screenshots that hopefully went to the right place on my computer. And I'll type in picture again. There probably is a way to put PDFs, but To be fair, I'm not going to go into the plugins that you can install on Rhino. That's more of a computer graphics. Take my computer graphics class during the summer if you want to learn more about the computer. But in our case, I'm going to take those screenshots. So I think it's in my downloads, screenshots and recordings, and of course, these two from today. Why it won't let me go put it in? Interesting. Oh, they're HEIFs. That's okay. We'll turn them into images. Again, for the sake of tutorial. Downloads. Screenshots and recordings. I forgot, I set it to something ridiculous. So we'll take this shot, I'll file, export it, and I'll turn it into a PNG, and I'll put that on my desktop just to make it easier for today. Normally you shouldn't save something to your desktop. Guys, remember the name of the game in digital technology is to stay organized as possible, not putting final, 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 final one, final, final. No, really this one is the final. Seriously, stay organized as much as possible. But in my case, for the sake of tutorial, I gotta go a little fast. But I do actually organize these a little bit later, usually on the weekends. So let's open that in preview. Again, saving it as a PNG. PNGs are just, I think, better quality than JPEG, even though arguably you can get a pretty good JPEG these days, but export PNG to my desktop and we'll save it. But it does technically have to be an image file, at least for this certain command. So let's try that again. Picture. So far the commands that we've gone over are units and picture. So let's go to the desktop and voila. Hopefully those are the two screenshots I need. Awesome. And I do think you actually have to take it in one at a time. So we want to get that in. We can hit spacebar to enact another command, especially if it's the same command like picture and I need another image, I just hit spacebar and it actually does that command again. In my case, I think we already have the color, so let's also get that one. Sweet. I'm going to click for my base point and basically select another point. It's pretty intuitive, but since I want to maybe see it a little bit better, I'm going to enlarge it. The first thing that I want to do is actually make this to scale, right? I mean, don't get me wrong, you could do that really at any point, but it makes a lot more sense to do it from the beginning. That way you don't accidentally miss a line here and you have a tiny little line there. Anyway, it's a whole headache in itself. So doing things in order can be powerful as well. But the first thing that I might want and notice is that, at least in my screen recording, you're going to see a lot of choppiness because my video card doesn't know which one to show you, right? In my case, if I select both of these, I can go to Properties, which is this little color wheel at the top. You'll see a little paint tube called Material. We'll click on that. And we'll change its object transparency. So in my case, I'm going to be tracing this thing, so it makes a lot more sense to give it some transparency. Again, same thing as Photoshop, but arguably just a very different way. So from right there, it makes it a little bit easier to see. And I could scale one at a time, and again, I could scale one to the other, considering that they're actually fairly close to each other. You'll notice that there's also a layers panel. It looks like a little piece of pie with red, white, and blue. That is our layers panel. So again, all of these programs are honestly very similar to each other. But again, an opportunity to be organized. So you can double click usually on these. I'm screen recording, so it's probably having a hard time. But I'm going to right click and rename, and I could say something like images. If I want to actually attach it to this layer, I'd select them, right click on the layer, and change object layer. Awesome. That way, well, if I'm on another layer and I turn this one off, I can now, just like Photoshop, turn it off. So again, a lot of similarities between these, and as you can imagine, if you brought in those layers, right, you can actually set those layers also in Rhino. No, it's not exactly automatic. You do kind of have to build this three-dimensional file from scratch. But from there, now we want to get it sized, and did anything change? Is it still 27 by 4? Okay, so we'll stick with that. 26 by 3.
Yeah, so it ended up being like 27 inches by 3.5.
This part or this part?
That part.
So that's 3.5?
Yeah. 3.
Honestly, it doesn't matter too much, but just keep in mind that you want to set that first, right? Regardless of what it is and what it might be. For the sake of tutorial, I'm just kind of going as fast as possible and to show you at least the method. So in my case, I'm going to switch to layer 2. That way I can basically just draw a regular line. Yes, it's that intuitive. I'm just going to type in line, enter. And it's going to ask, when in doubt, read the command bar. Because very often it's actually, bless you, it's actually asking you for the input, and it's really more like a conversation with the computer. For instance, the conversation right now is, hey, where do you want your start line? In my case, I'm going to select something familiar, some sort of base point. Now, to be fair, it's pretty fuzzy because it's a rasterized image. But I'm going to fake it till I make it, get pretty close. And quite literally, I'm going to type in 3 inches. So I'm going to type in 3, and literally the inch marker, right? This is not the foot marker twice, but literally the inch marker. You can also just type in inch, but since we're in the units of inches, you can also just type in 3. But again, I just like to explain that. So I'm going to type in 3 inches, and you'll notice it's pretty small, no? I mean, look at that little guy. And let's maybe choose a different color so you guys can see. Let's go with orange. Pretty small. So naturally, my images are a bit big. Now, honestly, the best way to do it is to size your images now. I'm going to do one at a time, but let's scale this to that. So in my case, scale. It's going to ask for that base point. That would be the same point that my image and my line are based up with. I'm going to click. It's going to ask for a reference point after I click. This is my reference point because that is the side that I want to be 3 inches. I'm going to hold shift so that it remains orthogonal. And I'm going to scale that back to, you guessed it, that line, that 3 inches. Now luckily I have O-snap on, and it immediately, actually my cursor brings up and it's like, is this the endpoint you're talking about? Yes, because that's exactly 3 inches. I'm going to go ahead and click, and voila, just like that, we actually have the correct size. Now to be fair, I could do this all over again, or fake it till I make it, and basically align those up again. So picking that same base point, awesome. Scaling it, and essentially doing the exact same thing. Hold shift, click, and bring it back. Voila. I know I make it look too easy. But in our case, I kind of want to go back to my origin point. That becomes important one day, especially when you start to go back and forth between programs. That origin point actually symbolizes a little bit of math. It's a 0, 0, 0 point, which stands for 0 in the X, 0 in the Y, and 0 in the Z, right? And it's known as our origin point. But again, just in case you were wondering, this grayish grid that you see is also called our C-plane, and it can be moved, and it can be accidentally moved all the time. When in doubt, type in C-plane, and you can restart that thing, right? Basically selecting world and selecting top. Now, nothing happened because it's already at the C world and it's already at the top. Anyway, so let's start drawing. Let's start making stuff. Now, for the most part, I'm not going to do the assignment, but I do want to show the technical aspects of the assignment, right? So one of the first things that I can do is really work one of these at a time. So they don't necessarily have to be on top of each other for this to exactly work. And I may want a little bit more space, so let's shorten those down a little bit. However, I think I'm going to start in the color just because I know a lot of us have the colors, and the differentiation of those colors is to maybe start to understand this a little bit better. The first thing we got to do is 2D. I know it sounds redundant, but we essentially have to draw it again. However, it is much easier, arguably, especially to be precise in Rhino, and often that's why I'd say we use it. In my case, I may want to decide my layers first and go, well, now I'm going to make these actually, I don't know, grid, territories, points. Maybe I start off with point. So again, maybe the first thing that I do is actually start to understand what is a point. So in my case, I can type in point. I'm under that layer, and quite literally, I'd find the center of something and add a point. I hit spacebar, add another point. Hit spacebar, add another point. Spacebar again, I see another. Now you guys probably know your stuff better than I do, but I'm playing like look at it, you know, today. However, it looks like I got all the points, maybe not. There's another spacebar, point. Now I'm kind of just faking it till I make it, but if I wanted to be extremely precise, I could type in circle, And I could do all kinds of circles, if you will, but if I do a 2-point circle, I can select one side and select the other. Wonderful. I can make all kinds of circles. In fact, a regular circle, I can get the center point now that I have my center on there. It's going to find the center for me, and I can make another circle. Again, I know that's a little hard to see with the purple, but hopefully pretty well in the recording. I'll switch that purple for today. I thought I did, didn't I? Oh, maybe I hit back. That's okay. A little bit easier to see. But again, it starts to be a little bit of different information. Don't get me wrong, there's not a lot we can do with a point because mathematically a point isn't there. It's actually conceptual, right? But not to get into a math class today. In my case, I may, since I'm going to be tracing this, I may want to actually lock my image layer. That way I don't accidentally move it. Again, same thing as Photoshop or really any other program. My favorite tool of all time is the orthogonal polyline, right? So in my case, you can either hit this button that looks like a polyline or simply type in polyline. Wonderful. In my case, I want to do this on another layer, and I may want to just say lines. So in my case, lines. I'm going to choose a color that you guys can probably see while I'm tracing. Let's go for the gold today. Why not? In my case, you'll also notice that I'm hitting my right click and panning as well. You'll notice in the two-dimensional views, you still kind of use the same keys. And do you guys know what I mean by right click on the mouse? Okay, just making sure, because if you're doing this on a trackpad, oh my God, stop and get a mouse. Go to Goodwill, get one for $5, wired. It's okay, you don't have to show anybody. Or worst case scenario, unplug one of these computers, but make sure after you leave, you plug it back in, right? So the next student doesn't think that their computer's broken. Does that make sense, guys?
Yes.
Honestly, it's a huge struggle trying to use a trackpad. Yes, Carlos?
Sorry, how are you zooming in and out?
Zooming in and out. Just using the scroll,
Mine's
not doing anything. Yours actually has a 3D mouse on it. You see that little weird dial? Move that one around. That one's really fun. Good. But yes, it is extremely sensitive, by the way. If it's too confusing, Carl, you might want to move computers because that one is kind of dedicated towards a space mouse. However, might as well practice. Space mouse are pretty cool, not going to lie. But again, not required. In our case, back to what I was doing, the polyline, and as you can guess, we're going to trace it. And trace it to the best of our ability. I can also hold shift. You guys may notice if I hold shift, it actually stays orthogonal. So again, that's a huge plus, especially if I'm trying to be extremely accurate. And one thing to be said about this program is even though it's a curve, even though it's a line or a spline, it's called a curve. It's very weird, very confusing actually for most of us. But in my case, I know that I'm going to need closed elements, so I'd want to have O snap on. That way I can lock in. Sweet. I'm going to hit spacebar again because I want to do that all day. I may want to do it for this item. Spacebar again. Maybe I want to get this item. And again, I'm just doing lines. Hitting spacebar to exit my command as well. Now I'm not going to sit here and trace this all day for the sake of tutorial, but I do want to get a couple bits and pieces. For instance, I'm noticing that there's this kind of wonderful magenta color. I might actually want that to be a separate layer. So again, rename. Maybe I call it the planar information or planes. Now let's go for green today. Or again, maybe we can match that color. In fact, I wonder if there's an eyedropper tool. Oh. Will it let me? Apparently it doesn't want me to. Rhino 8. Nice. Give myself, no, don't quit it. Are you later? Okay, well, it looks like you actually can do that, but for the sake of tutorial, just get it pretty close as possible. That's pretty close. Nailed it. Anyway. So, let's get that information as well. Polyline tool. Awesome. And as you can see, we can do the same things in a very different way in Rhino. Now I'm going as fast as possible just for the sake of time. That, and in case there's actually a lot of questions at the end. But really, one of the first things that you guys can do is, of course, trace and dissect even the elements that you just did. In my case, I also might want some grid lines, at least for the sake of tutorial. So I'm going to rename this one grids. Guess my caps lock is on. Oops. And let's go with a different color for that one. And I usually don't choose yellow because yellow usually symbolizes a highlighted color. So let's go with red. But maybe let's get some grid information. So I'm going to use my lines. Enter some lines. And as you can imagine, once you actually draw all of this, there starts to be a really interesting result. I'm going to use a polyline instead. The thing about the polyline is it continues my drawing, so that's kind of nice. And again, I'm just trying to get some items for the sake of exercise, right? Something like this, I may actually want to mimic that curvilinear element. You'll notice that there is a spline, or it's called B-spline option. If you click on that, you can actually use it effectively even more. And I'm just gonna kind of ballpark it real quick. Check this out. Give or take, we'll get that one. And we can actually fuse some of these as well, but if you click on it, you can actually still control the points. So say that was a little off, I can again grab my point, quite literally drag it right into the exact spot that I want it. I can also continue my line with another polyline. So if it needed to become straight, it could. Not that it does here, but you know, it could. Let's say it does that. And what's really weird is the interpretation between digital, right? I mean, you could really start to go, well, is this a plane? You can also line up to the previous element that you had, right? Oh, don't hold shift, otherwise it'll go straight. I can also overlap certain items as necessary. So again, just trying to trace it as much as possible. But as you can imagine, this is probably one of the steps that arguably takes the longest, is getting the right lines, getting all the pieces, hitting enter and making sure you actually have that piece, turning off your images and seeing what you do have. So again, very familiar, right? I mean, essentially, arguably what we just did in Photoshop, but in just a slightly different way, right? The next thing that Professor Bohuslav would like you to challenge yourselves with, in my case, I want the bounding box. So I'm going to use a rectangle or type in rectangle. Very intuitive program. So I'm going to type that rectangle, and I do want to get basically the extent of my piece as well. You probably want to as well for at least this next step we're about to do. Now, if you're in my computer graphics, you know this all too well. You always make a copy. Why? Because you might mess up. And let's face it, you don't want to do the entire tracing again if you mess up. You just want to make another copy if you mess up. Again, I can't express this enough because as a student, Professor Verrett was not good at this. And making a copy, I'd literally do the project over and over and over again, not realizing, oh shit, I can just copy it and try again. So in my case, preventative, but I'm gonna unlock everything, that way I can get that image as well. But yep, it'll copy the image. I'll hit copy, enter. It'll ask for a base point, click, hold shift, and I can move it as far as I like, or anywhere. But in my case, now this is the one in question. And now I can delete things because, well, I have a copy. Again, not too bad. But I'd want to finish, obviously, the tracing step before I got to this next one. Now, let's take a look at it in that top view. Obviously, we see the top view, we see the side view, which is literally flat, and the right view, which is also literally flat. So again, it's trying to show us multiple views at a single given time, and that becomes really important once we start getting three-dimensional. Now let's say I accidentally do this. Oh my god, where'd it go? Literally just select the entire screen, and there's this thing called zoom extents or zoom selected, and it looks like a little magnifying glass. It's also called zoom selected. So you can type in zoom selected, one word by the way, as soon as you hit spacebar, that enables a command. So you can't hit spacebar, right? So magic moment, click, voila. It zooms it right back into the selected view, right? from here, I arguably may want to even make another copy. You know? Again, that's just kind of my forte. Like, when in doubt, if I'm ever scared, I'm making a copy. So for this next step, I may want a flat version, and I may want a doubled version. So what Professor Bohuslav would like you to do is three-dimensionalize this. And there's many ways to do that, but the specific way is for Bohuslav to work in section. However, it's not this, but it's this, right? It's almost like a crosshatch, if you will, right? So if I take this piece and I go like this, and I have my original piece, now I have a perfect piece. Now I know you won't see that in a video, so let's do it actually in space. We'll make that copy, and using Gumball, you'll notice actually this is called Gumball. You'll see these axes, these rotation ability, and every time you select an object, they appear. Now they won't appear for you if you don't have Gumball turned on. So make sure you come down here and turn on Gumball. Why is it called Gumball? No idea, but it's an awesome name. So without Gumball, that goes away. With Gumball, that stays. To be fair, you could also just rotate this, but if you check out the axes, you'll see that our red axis is going to make this into a section. If I highlight over that, click and drag, you'll see that I can rotate it. If I hold Shift, it'll make it a perfect 90. I'll click that out and basically put those together. I'll type in move because I want to move this thing from a specific point. I've got to find that specific point. In my case, I want the midpoint of my line, so make sure midpoint's checked. Otherwise, you'll be like, where's the midpoint? It won't tell you. And maybe even turn off other ones. That way it doesn't accidentally click another. In my case, midpoint to midpoint. So midpoint and midpoint. Awesome. You can almost see this kind of wireframe thing happening, don't you? In fact, arguably, you can even start to see shapes that are happening. You guys see that? It's almost like a three-dimensional shape already there. So let's make it one, right? A couple of ways that we can make three-dimensional shapes. As some of you guys know, we can pipe things. So one of arguably the easiest and cheesiest things that we can do is pipe. So if you were to pipe something, you can actually select the thickness. So maybe the thickness of that line is based, well, maybe on the line weight that I gave it in a two-dimensional realm, right? So maybe, I don't know, maybe it was a thick. In my case, just for the sake, I'm gonna decide my radius. It's gonna say, hey, do you wanna keep that radius? I'm gonna hit enter, and voila, right? We have this three-dimensional view. If I wanna isolate it a little bit better, again, zoom extents. And that's gonna recap also my rotation camera. So again, I'm throwing a lot at you guys. Keep in mind it is recorded, but you may have to pause, see what I clicked on or see what I said, and type it out. Can't stress this enough. You should probably work together on this one. You'd be surprised the camaraderie. There's usually kind of one student, cough, cough, my computer graphics students, that are gonna understand some of the way that Rhino is working. Make sure you're kind of watching them, work alongside them, make friends. That's why we work in studio. Another thing that we can do, say the same element, is spline, right? We can basically make an object from these two pieces. So let's go ahead and do so. In my case, let's try sweep. In my case, sweep 1 versus sweep 2. And this is kind of just to have fun and show you what it does. But we can take sweep, enter. It's gonna ask for a rail. It's gonna ask for a shape. I'm gonna take those two, enter. It's gonna ask for a direction, not extremely important. As you can see, probably not what we want. So again, don't get me wrong, you want to experiment and see what you want versus what you don't want. And the reason I show you this is because, well, I ran into stuff like this all the time. But to be absolutely honest with you, shoot, that's like a design concept right there. Anyway, that was like a whole building. But perhaps actually some of the pieces that are made are actually quite nice. And after all, I could refine, couldn't I? Now, I don't accidentally want to get rid of everything, but again, this is for the sake of tutorial. The next thing I could do is loft something. So let's take these two pieces, let's loft them. Choose a direction, which to be fair, you can have fun with that too. Usually it works better if you keep things perpendicular to a center line like it's doing right there. Ooh, quite interesting, to say the very least, no? Starting to mend and put those things together in a very interesting way. Now, right now, technically, it's flat. It's like not even a piece of paper. It's literally two-dimensional. So like if you go to say like a rendered mode, you'll see that it's actually more like paper, right? It's almost like a folded instance. We can give that thickness by offsetting that surface. So offset, surface. I can give it a thickness of, I don't know, let's say of 1/4 of an inch. So 0.25 inches, enter. And it's gonna give it some thickness, however, it doesn't always work. So again, the experiment is actually half the battle here. Another thing that I could do is explode this and actually isolate some of those pieces. So if I explode it, which breaks it down to its simplest form, and if I explode that, you'll see that I get individual pieces. Maybe I find that some I don't want. Say for instance this one, or this one. I can still further refine my elements, right? Perhaps that piece was too complex, or folding on itself far too much. And maybe I want to keep that. Does that make sense, guys? Starting to eliminate. Yes?
Maybe this is like too unedited what we're doing. But
Sure.
we are laser cutting this stuff under. Is there a certain complexity we should not be going at based on what can be laser cutted?
Not too much, and it's a good question. Just to repeat that question back for the video, how much is too complex? After all, we do have to laser cut these, so is there anything to avoid, right, in terms of that? And it's an excellent question. To be honest, yes, right? However, not to get too far into it, but I'm going to put these back together. I'm going to show you how to unfold them. Now, we'll do that obviously a little bit more for the laser cutter and, of course, actually tomorrow in computer graphics. But it's a good question. So, for instance, I could copy this. I'll put it out here real quick. And I'm going to join those back together. Remember, I exploded them, so they're actually all separate. Once I click on it, they're basically together. If I unroll surface, and I don't want to explode it, but I could, enter. It should actually make it around my origin point, but look, some nice flat pieces for my laser cutter that I can just roll back together. So to answer your question,
Not yet, but it is giving you a sneak preview.
however, one thing I would say, it's an excellent question because there are things that mathematically don't unroll. So keep that in mind. It is possible to make an impossible object in a digital realm, whereas in reality, we can't, right? You can't force two objects to be fused together, whereas in this world, you can, right? And it's very tempting, it's very alluring, but it's an excellent question, right? Because things can be too complex, but after all, I mean, that's why you experiment first,
And
right, with some of these
why,
elements.
As you do this, you're looking at what can I still do analog? What can I understand in terms of hand skills and materials? And what am I definitely going to be relying on, right? The laser cutter and Rhino for. There's two worlds, you know that. You will see that conventionally, and then the digital, the analog and the digital. And when the computer can help you make things that if you were to try to make by hand, it would be next to impossible.
A couple other things. I know these are the basics, and I would say
I love the floating points.
what's really nice is when you can actually you can use two operations. So for instance, don't get me wrong, this is typically just extruding, right? And I can extrude both sides, but I can also subtract, right? So for instance, that piece that it came from, so let's see it a little bit better and go to like say a ghosted mode. We should be able to see some of those lines, and it might be a little hard, but there's the one that I have. And I could actually decide to wire cut things. I could select this object and that one and decide where it gets cut. So in my case, it's stuck in the X direction, so I'll switch it to the Y direction. Yes, it will require a little bit more math, guys, right? Or sorry, in my case, Z direction, my bad. And I want to slice the wire through this clay. Once I do, I have an entirely new object made where I can even start to think about the void that it creates as an object. And I'm now working with the frame, I'm working with the field, the boundary, in order to now make the object. What better way to start to collide some of these interdisciplinary relationships? So in my case, starting to make voids. I could do the opposite and make an object. But again, selected from those two unique pieces that are arguably the exact same piece. Did you guys see that? Let's try it again on another piece.
Very important play is important.
Another thing to understand is that we can now draw three-dimensionally. Let's say I wanted to connect those points now, but in a very unique way. Isn't that interesting? Now those points are completely translated in a very different way spatially. However, let's get fancy with the spices. One of my favorite tools, as Kayla knows, is my sweep tool. So I'm going to use actually maybe one of my pieces as a profile. Sweep. And you can do sweep 1, sweep 2, test them out, right? See what they do. See what they ask for. In my case, the rail is going to be that spline. And the sweep shape will be, say, this triangle. Enter. Enter again. And voila. Now, it didn't actually get all the piece, and it's because, well, I should probably select the one that's a little bit more perpendicular to the line. But hey, very interesting. Let's try that again. Sweep. I can do space bar. There's my rail. And I'm going to try this piece. Is that the one I selected? No, that's not the one I selected. Let's try that again. Ooh. Much different, no? Even though I arguably use the same piece, those two pieces were in two different orientations. They have different mathematical and geometric capabilities, right? But as you can imagine, at least to cut it a little short today, it makes quite an interesting three-dimensional object. Now, to be fair, yeah, there's a little bit of heysay there, and I could manipulate that line a little bit more, right? For instance, well, I notice it's colliding with itself, so maybe I take that point and actually try again. You see what I'm saying? Like, I would control that rail maybe a little bit better, or I would make my profile or choose a different profile that maybe had a different result, right? Sorry, I know rendered view is kind of hard to look at. It's like, my eyes. But very interesting to say the least. So what I mean by that is controlling the point a little bit better. Oh, sorry, that point a little bit better. That way it doesn't, you saw how it kind of folded in on itself. I mean, don't get me wrong, we're still connecting the points. But instead of relying on sort of the automaticness that the digital computer is very good at, we're being a little bit more controlling. But what's nice is we have incredible precision and control with these pieces. And we don't have to settle for what the computer creates. We can manipulate it still. And in fact, it's almost kind of it's overbearing, right? You almost have so much control that you almost don't know what to do. So again, I can't say enough, experiment, fail, right? Because you can't, right? Don't worry, I have another copy right here.
Can you do one thing in the last?
Absolutely, absolutely.
So they will still be held accountable for kind of a plan above an elevation or a section
Absolutely.
and a cross section.
Wonderful.
Can you talk a little bit about that? Because right, you're going to be and then a plan, a kind of a perspective view, right? Which we'll talk more about.
Now here's where the real magic is, right? So for instance, once I've created an object and I go to a shaded view, voila, right? These views are actually already being produced and projected for you simultaneously as you move. So essentially, as I move an object, it's going to move it too, right? So be very careful about that. It's very easy to kind of lose objects in this world. But one of my favorite things, and of course I think a lot of people's favorite things, is the ability to instantly take something 3D and make it 2D. How do you do that? Literally typing in make 2D. I know, it's a very intuitive program, but I'm gonna hit make 2D, and I have a lot of options here. In fact, I can keep tangent edges, especially if I have curvilinear items. I can get my hidden lines. However, one of the most important things is to maintain source layers, because after all, we were just extremely organized. But let's press apply. You'll notice that it always pops up around our origin. And quite literally, there's a wonderful line drawing that now I can take into Illustrator and manipulate still, right? To give it back that line weight, to give it back its characters that we drew ourselves. Another thing is perhaps a section. Now, it's a little bit more advanced. I haven't even shown my computer graphics until tomorrow. But also, oh my God, clipping plane. So if you type in clipping plane, so clipping plane, it makes this wonderful little plane for us. And it controls that just like a section. You guys see that? What do you think happens if I rotate it? I get the other section.
Crazy.
You know what's even better? I can highlight the whole thing and make 2D. Now keep in mind, if I make 2D in this view, what's it going to do?
Might do his perspective.
It's going to make a perspective. Thank you, James. Because it's always going to give me the exact view that I created. Oh, unless I accidentally cancel it. My bad. But let's get that section. So one thing to notice too is when in doubt, go to a shaded view. It's just easier to look at, in my opinion. And instead of a wireframe where you can't really tell the distance of items and things like this. But yeah, I'd want to make sure that my section cut or my clipping plane, sorry, I'm always calling it a section cut, but I'd want to make sure under properties that I can see it in all views. You'll notice, oh, by default, it's only on the perspective. So if I click on top, front, and right, you'll notice that it actually starts to cut these. You guys see that? Almost like looking at a brain scan. Have you guys ever seen those MRIs, right? Essentially thousands of layers. Who knew architecture was literally the same thing going on? But now I can take that view and make 2D to produce a section. Does that make sense? Because now it's taking that clipping plane view.
And imagine, I mean, if you learn something in graphics 1, and you learn something in graphics, you're learning something in graphics 2, right? And now you see how this works. It's doing everything that you were taught to do, right? To understand orthographic drawing, you're like, right? In terms of plan, section, elevation. So we want to try to work in that realm, which we'll talk more about on Monday. But
Another thing is, guys, I'm going to be stepping by early in the morning. I get here at 8 in the morning anyway, so I'm going to come by and start to answer some of the, let's face it, we all got very unique things, even though we all trace the same drawing. So you're going to run into certain things where you're like, sir, what happened? You're going to get this like gigantic thing. That's okay. I want you to make mistakes. I want you to be inspired by the very shapes that you're starting to manipulate. However, I'm also going to do this in the background probably during the weekend. That way I have somewhere to go with, or I might ask another student, especially if you have a pretty good digital model going, to maybe use your copy. That way we can start to unroll it and of course get it ready for the laser cutter. Now, not every piece can be cut in a laser cutter, but we'll get to that on the next tutorial. Any major questions or want me to recap on something real quick, guys? Again, I say that because it'll be recorded and somebody may very well have the exact same question. There's no such thing as a dumb question here.
So we're not going to be printing on Monday. It's going to be desk grids the way we did on this past Monday. But I need you to play, right? You need to push yourself to where you can find some of what Professor Brett has given you an opportunity to visualize. You're probably working in 3D, right?
Absolutely.
Almost, and then, so maybe if you don't know how to go from 3D back to 2D, right? So that we can print. We can reduce those back to 2D for Wednesday. That's when we're going to be doing that. And we'll be printing a plan, an elevation and cross-section, and a kind of a plan oblique or perspective view. So that we'll talk more about formatting the drawing on a 24 by 36 on Monday for Wednesday.
Another thing to keep in mind, guys, also my exercise 1 and exercise 2, if you kind of go through the videos of my computer graphics, we go over several three-dimensional tools that may not necessarily be your exact project, but it'll go over some of the operations, right, of making three-dimensional objects from two-dimensional pieces. So again, exercise 1, exercise 2, and even arguably exercise 3 gets into this as well.
And you went over for them how to get their trial version of Rhino?
Correct.
Okay. Any questions? Yeah, for him. Oh, for me.
I'll go ahead and end the recording for today.
So I